The kingdom of Arendelle shimmered. It was a jewel of ancient forests and towering peaks, yet beneath its beauty a dangerous game played out. Power was the prize. Ambitions clashed. Secrets festered. Treachery lurked in every shadow. Arendelle was a tapestry of alliances woven with threads of silk and steel. Noble houses vied for influence. Each sought to outmaneuver the others. The throne, the ultimate symbol of power, stood as the ultimate prize. At the heart of this intricate dance stood two figures, Prince Aldric, heir to the throne, and Lady Alara, a woman of cunning beauty and whispered rumors. Their destinies, intertwined from birth, would shape the fate of Arendelle itself. The balance of power was a delicate thing. One wrong move, one ill-timed whisper, could send the kingdom spiraling into chaos. And in the court of Arendelle, chaos was a hungry beast, always waiting for its moment to strike. Prince Aldric was born to rule. He was the heir to a legacy centuries old. As a child, he had gazed upon the throne with awe. It had seemed a distant and glorious destiny. Now he saw it for what it truly was, a gilded cage. Aldric possessed a keen mind and a noble heart. He was deeply loved by his people, admired for his compassion and grace. But within him, a battle raged. The weight of responsibility threatened to crush his spirit. He yearned for a life beyond duty and decorum. He dreamed of freedom, of adventure, of choosing his own path. But such dreams were forbidden to one born in his position. His life was not his own. It belonged to Arendelle. The crown prince carried the burden of his lineage with quiet dignity. Yet, those closest to him saw the flicker of longing in his eyes. They heard the unspoken desires in his silences. Lady Alara was an enigma. Her beauty was legendary, her intelligence as sharp as a dagger. She moved through the court with a grace that captivated all who crossed her path. Yet, behind her dazzling smile, a keen mind plotted and schemed. Alara was born to a minor noble house, her influence earned through wit and ambition. Rumors followed her like shadows. Some whispered of dark pacts and forbidden magic. They called her a sorceress, a temptress, a danger to all who dared to underestimate her. The truth, as always, was far more complex. Alara was a survivor. She had clawed her way to power in a world that sought to diminish her. She used every weapon at her disposal, her beauty, her intelligence, and yes, even the whispers of sorcery that surrounded her like a shroud. She was a force to be reckoned with. Her ambition was a raging fire, her gaze capable of melting the resolve of even the most stalwart heart. And in the game of power, Lady Alara played to win. The weight of the crown pressed heavily upon Aldric's brow, even in the privacy of his chambers. He stood before a window, its panes like dark eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. Outside, the city of Arendelle slumbered, oblivious to the turmoil within its future king. He was to be crowned in a matter of months. The thought, once a source of pride, now tasted like ash in his mouth. Aldric yearned for the freedom to choose his own path, the freedom to roam the world, to face unknown dangers, to discover who he truly was beyond the stifling confines of his birthright. But duty bound him, as unyielding as the stone walls of his castle. He was the heir to the throne, the last of his line. The responsibility for the well-being of an entire kingdom rested upon his shoulders, a burden he was not sure he was strong enough to bear. He closed his eyes, drawing a deep, steadying breath. The scent of old books and polished wood filled his senses, a familiar comfort in this moment of uncertainty. His gaze fell upon the heavy tome lying open on his desk. It was a history of Arendelle, its pages filled with tales of both triumph and tragedy. He was destined to be a part of that history, to add his own chapter to the ever-unfolding saga of his kingdom. But what would that chapter hold? Only time would tell. A soft knock sounded at the door, pulling Aldric from his troubled thoughts.
Enter.
The door opened, and Master Theron entered, his aged face etched with wisdom and concern. Theron was more than just Aldric's tutor. He was a mentor, a confidant, a surrogate father to the young prince who had lost his own far too young.
Your Highness.
Theron greeted, bowing his head respectfully.
I apologize for the intrusion, but it is late and you have yet to retire.
Aldrich managed a faint smile.
Some burdens are not so easily set aside, old friend.
Theron's gaze was knowing. He had witnessed firsthand the growing weight upon Aldrich's shoulders.
The crown is a heavy burden.
He agreed, his voice soft.
But you are not alone in carrying it.
Aldrich sighed, gesturing to the chair opposite him.
Come, Theron, sit. Your counsel is always welcome, even in the darkest hours.
Theron settled into the chair, his gaze fixed upon the troubled prince.
You are troubled, Aldrich. What weighs so heavily upon your heart?
Aldrich hesitated, then rose from his chair and began to pace the length of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence.
I am to be king, yet I feel like a prisoner in my own palace. I long to see the world beyond these walls, Theron. To experience life as an ordinary man, free from the constraints of my birthright.
Theron listened patiently, allowing Aldrich to voice the doubts that plagued him. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured.
Your feelings are understandable, Aldrich, but you were born for greatness. You have a duty to your people, to your kingdom.
Aldrich turned to face his old tutor, his expression conflicted.
And what of my duty to myself, Theron? Am I to sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of a crown?
Lady Alara was a creature of the night. Her beauty was most striking in the soft glow of candlelight. It was in these shadowed hours that she truly held court. Her power resided not in vast armies or ancestral claims. Her strength was in whispers, in secrets, in the subtle manipulation of hearts and minds. Her chambers were a reflection of this duality. Rich tapestries adorned the walls, depicting scenes of ancient lore and whispered magic. The air hung heavy with the scent of exotic spices and rare perfumes, yet a chill permeated the room, a subtle reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath Ilara's enchanting facade. She sat before a vanity of polished silver, her reflection gazing back with cool detachment. Her fingers, adorned with rings of obsidian and silver, moved with deft precision as she braided her long, dark hair. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, a silent symphony of grace and control. Tonight, she had summoned the prince to her chambers. It was a risky move, fraught with danger. But Ilara was not one to shy away from a challenge. She thrived on the thrill of the game, the delicate dance of power and seduction. And in Prince Aldrich she sensed a vulnerability, a longing that she could exploit to her advantage. Aldrich arrived at Ilara's chambers with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He had heard the whispers, the rumors of her beauty and her ambition. He knew that to be in her presence was to court danger, to risk being drawn into a web of intrigue from which he might never escape. He found her seated upon a plush divan, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the fireplace. She looked up as he entered, her lips curving into a smile that was both alluring and unsettling.
Your Highness, you honor me with your presence.
Aldrich inclined his head, his gaze meeting hers with forced composure.
Lady Alara, I apologize for this late-night intrusion, but I received your summons and felt compelled to answer.
Compelled? Such a strong word, Your Highness. Tell me, what is it that compels you so?
Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Aldrich met her gaze, his expression unreadable. He knew that Ilara was testing him, probing for weakness. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing his uncertainty.
Curiosity, perhaps. I've heard much about you, Lady Alara, but rumors are often unreliable, are they not?
Indeed. Tell me, Your Highness, what have you heard?
Aldrich hesitated, weighing his words carefully. He could not reveal his true reasons for seeking her out. He could not admit that he was drawn to her power, to the aura of danger that clung to her like a second skin.
I have heard that you are a woman of influence, a woman who knows what she wants and is not afraid to take it.
The castle clock chimed midnight, each stroke a hammer blow against the silence. Aldrich moved through the darkened corridors, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. He had never been one for stealth, yet here he was, engaged in a clandestine meeting that could shatter the very foundations of his world. He had not been lying to Ilara. Curiosity did, indeed, draw him to her, but beneath that curiosity, a deeper hunger stirred within him. He craved her counsel, her insight into the shadowy machinations of the court. He sensed that she, perhaps alone among all those who surrounded him, understood the true burden of leadership. He reached her chambers, the door slightly ajar as if in silent invitation. A single candle burned within, casting long, flickering shadows across the room. Ilara stood by the window, her silhouette a stark contrast against the moonlit sky.
You came.
Her voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it held a note of triumph that sent a shiver down Aldrich's spine. He realized then that this was more than a meeting, it was a test, and one he could not afford to fail. Aldrich stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He could feel Ilara's gaze upon him, assessing his every move. He met her eyes, his expression carefully neutral.
I always keep my word, Lady Ilara.
His voice betrayed none of the apprehension he felt.
Even when it means risking everything?
She asked, turning to face him. The candlelight flickered across her features, softening the sharp intelligence in her eyes. For a fleeting moment, Aldrich glimpsed a flicker of vulnerability beneath her carefully constructed facade.
Sometimes the greatest risks yield the greatest rewards.
She smiled then, a slow, predatory curve of her lips that sent a wave of heat through him.
Indeed, but one must be careful not to cut oneself on the blade.
Their conversation was a delicate dance, each word a carefully placed step on a path fraught with danger. They circled each other, probing for weaknesses, testing the limits of their newfound alliance. Hours passed. They spoke of many things, of courtly intrigue, of the burdens of power, of the dreams that haunted their waking hours. Aldrich found himself confiding in Ilara as he had never confided in another soul, revealing his doubts and fears, his longing for a life beyond the gilded cage of his birthright. Ilara listened with a stillness that both intrigued and unnerved him. She offered no platitudes, no easy reassurances, yet in her silence Aldrich found a strange comfort. He sensed that she understood him in a way that few others ever could. As dawn approached, casting its pale light through the window, they reached an unspoken understanding. They were bound by circumstance, by their mutual ambition, and by a shared sense of isolation that transcended their differences.
We could be strong together.
Her voice was barely a whisper, her gaze met his, and in that moment Aldrich saw a flicker of something akin to trust in her eyes. He knew that their alliance was a dangerous game, one that could cost them everything, but he also knew that he could not win this game alone. He needed Ilara's cunning, her ruthlessness, her willingness to operate in the shadows where he could not.
Together.
He agreed, his voice firming with resolve. And in that moment of shared purpose, their pact was forged, a bond of ambition and necessity, sealed in the heart of the midnight hour. As the sun rose over Arendelle, the kingdom seemed to hold its breath. The city, usually vibrant with the sounds of merchants and townsfolk, was eerily quiet. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very earth sensed the brewing storm that threatened to engulf them all. Aldrich and Ilara, bound by their secret pact, moved through this charged atmosphere with a sense of urgency and purpose. Aldrich stood on the castle battlements, his gaze sweeping over the lands he was destined to rule. The weight of his new alliance with Ilara pressed upon him, a constant reminder of the dangerous game they were playing. He knew that their bond was fragile, built on mutual need and the thin veneer of trust. Yet it was the only path that seemed to offer a glimmer of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. Ilara, meanwhile, continued her subtle machinations within the court. Her influence was felt in every corner of the castle, from the whispered conversations in the servants' quarters to the grand councils of the nobility. She moved with a grace that belied the turmoil within her, a master strategist weaving her web of intrigue with practiced precision. Despite their best efforts, the storm continued to gather strength. Reports of unrest and dissent reached the court daily, each one a harbinger of the chaos to come. Aldrich and Ilara knew that they had to act swiftly to consolidate their power and quell the rising tide before it could sweep them away. Yet in the shadowed halls of the castle, they faced enemies both seen and unseen, each one waiting for the slightest misstep to exploit. In the heart of the castle, the council chamber buzzed with tension. Aldrich and Ilara sat at the head of the table, their expressions stern as they listened to the reports from their advisors. The unrest in the outlying regions was growing. fueled by whispers of rebellion and discontent. The nobles, always eager to protect their own interests, were divided, their loyalties shifting with the winds of fortune.
The weight of their scrutiny. It feels like a physical force pressing down on me. I must project strength, show them I'm capable of leading through this storm.
Yet the doubts that had plagued him for so long still lingered, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. Ilara, ever the picture of poise and confidence, spoke with a calm authority that belied the turmoil within her.
Our strategy is clear. We will quell the unrest and secure our position. Here are the steps we will take.
Her words were met with nods of agreement, but Aldrich could see the flicker of uncertainty in the eyes of the assembled nobles. As the meeting drew to a close, Aldrich felt a surge of determination. He knew that he could not afford to falter, not now when so much was at stake. He had to believe in the path they had chosen, to trust in the bond he had forged with Ilara. Only then could they hope to weather the storm and emerge victorious on the other side. As night fell, the castle was cloaked in a heavy silence. Aldrich and Ilara met in the privacy of his chambers, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single candle. The weight of the day's events hung between them, a palpable tension that neither could ignore. They had made progress, but the road ahead was fraught with peril, each step a potential misstep that could lead to their undoing.
We are walking a fine line, Ilara. One wrong move, and everything we've worked for could unravel.
I know the risks, Aldrich, but we cannot afford to hesitate. We must act with decisiveness and resolve. Our enemies are many, and they will exploit any sign of weakness.
Their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. They were bound together by necessity, their fates intertwined in a dance that balanced on the edge of a knife. They could not afford to fail, not when the future of Arendelle hung in the balance. As the candle burned lower, casting long shadows across the room, Aldrich felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, but he also knew that he was not alone.
Together.
He echoed, raising his glass in a silent toast. And in that moment, the storm outside seemed a little less daunting, the darkness a little less oppressive. For as long as they stood together, they believed they could face whatever trials awaited them. The weight of their alliance pressed upon Aldrich. He found solace in the quiet hours, the time before dawn when the castle slept. Yet even in solitude, he could not escape the whispers that followed him. They clung to him like cobwebs, spun from doubt and fear.
My ambition is a force of nature, as beautiful and as dangerous as a wildfire. I will sacrifice anything, anyone to achieve my goals.
Ilara was a master strategist, her mind a labyrinth of plots and counterplots. Aldrich found himself drawn to her strength, her unwavering certainty in a world that seemed to crumble around them. But there was a coldness in her eyes that chilled him to the bone. Her ambition, he realized, knew no bounds. She would sacrifice anything, anyone to achieve her goals, and Aldrich, caught in her web, would be swept along in her wake.
The whispers, they're growing louder, slithering into my thoughts like venomous serpents. Am I becoming the very thing I had sworn to oppose? Am I sacrificing my honor, my very soul, for a power I never truly desired?
The whispers grew louder, slithering into his thoughts like venomous serpents. Was he becoming the very thing he had sworn to oppose? Was he sacrificing his honor, his very soul, for a power he had never truly desired?
I reveled in the chaos that consumed Arendelle. I thrived on the tension, the ever-shifting alliances, the fear that clouded the eyes of my enemies. I was a spider, patiently weaving my web, tightening the strands around those who dared to oppose me.
Ilara had anticipated Aldrich's doubts. His moral compass, his innate goodness, was both his greatest strength and his most glaring weakness. But she needed him. He was the key to securing her position, to solidifying her power.
I would mold him, shape him into the weapon I needed. I would exploit his vulnerabilities, his longing for a love he could never find within the confines of his duty, and in doing so, I would bind him to me, heart and soul.
The price of power, Ilara knew, was often dear, but it was a price she was more than willing to pay. She had sacrificed everything to reach this point. She would not be denied her destiny, not by sentiment, not by conscience, not even by love. Arendelle teetered on the brink of war. Neighboring kingdoms watched with hungry eyes, sensing weakness at the heart of the once great power. Within the court, whispers turned to shouts, accusations flew like poisoned arrows.
I find myself caught in a maelstrom of my own making. I can no longer ignore the consequences of my alliance with Elara. Her methods, her ruthless pursuit of power, fill me with growing unease.
He had always believed that the ends did not justify the means. But what if the very survival of his kingdom hung in the balance? Could he, in good conscience, turn his back on the woman who had promised him the strength to rule?
The crossroads loom before me, a stark choice between my conscience and my duty. One path promises power, the other, ruin. But which path will lead me to true peace, to the fulfillment I so desperately crave?
The grand hall of Arendelle's castle buzzed with anticipation. Nobles, adorned in their finest attire, whispered behind gloved hands. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, a discordant note in the orchestrated grandeur. Tonight, a grand ball was to be held, a celebration of Arendelle's enduring strength. Yet, beneath the surface of revelry, a storm brewed. The whispers spoke of a reckoning, a confrontation that would determine the fate of the kingdom.
I stand in the shadows apart from the throng. My regal bearing does little to ease the turmoil within me. I have made my choice, a choice that cuts against the grain of my very being. My heart aches with a grief I cannot name.
Elara, radiant in a gown of shimmering silver, moved through the crowd with the grace of a predator. Her eyes, sharp and cold, missed nothing. She had anticipated this moment, had orchestrated every detail with her signature ruthlessness. Tonight, her victory would be complete. But as the music swelled and the dancers whirled, a figure emerged from the shadows, disrupting the carefully crafted facade. It was Master Theron, his frail form imbued with a strength that belied his age. In his hands he held a scroll, its seal broken, its contents a revelation that would shatter the fragile peace. Theron's voice, though quiet, cut through the revelry like a sword. He spoke of betrayal, of dark pacts and manipulations. He revealed Elara for what she truly was, a master manipulator, a weaver of shadows who sought to claim Arendelle for her own. The crowd gasped, their whispers turning to murmurs of disbelief and outrage. Aldrich watched as Elara's carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the steely resolve beneath. Her eyes, no longer cold, blazed with fury. She made no attempt to deny the accusations.
I embrace them. I proclaim my right to rule.
The tapestry of lies she had so carefully woven was unraveling, yet she seemed unconcerned, her gaze fixed on Aldrich. The room erupted in chaos. Nobles scrambled for their swords, their cries of anger and fear echoing off the high ceilings.
I know I can no longer remain silent. My choice has brought us to this precipice, and now I must face the consequences.
Drawing upon a wellspring of strength he did not know he possessed, he stepped forward, his voice commanding silence. The battle was swift and brutal. Loyalties, long held in check, erupted in a maelstrom of steel and fury. The Grand Hall, once a symbol of Arendelle's splendor, became a battleground, its polished floors stained with the blood of both friend and foe. Aldrich fought with a ferocity he had never known, his heart heavy with the knowledge of his own complicity in this tragedy. He had allowed himself to be seduced by Elara's promises, blinded by his own desires. Now he fought to atone for his mistakes, to protect the kingdom he had sworn to serve. Elara, her fury a whirlwind of dark magic and cold steel, proved a formidable opponent, but she had underestimated the strength of Aldrich's resolve, the depth of his love for his people. In the end, it was this love that proved her undoing. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, a heavy silence descended upon the hall. The cost of victory was etched on every face, the scars of betrayal and loss a stark reminder of the fragility of peace.
I stand amidst the wreckage, wounded but unbroken, my gaze fixed on the dawn breaking over the horizon. The shadows of the past still linger, but in the nascent light, I see the promise of a new day, a chance to rebuild Arendelle on a foundation of truth and justice.
The road ahead would be long and arduous, but Aldrich knew he would not face it alone, for in the crucible of conflict, he had found his true strength, not in the wielding of power, but in the courage to admit his mistakes and the compassion to forgive those who had wronged him. And as the sun rose over Arendelle, casting its golden light upon the ravaged hall, a new chapter began, a testament to the enduring spirit of a kingdom forged anew in the fires of adversity.